Okay, so today I want to talk about Thomas Hobbes, the state of nature, and why he thinks freedom might be a bad thing. So imagine you in a state of nature. And what Hobbes means by a state of nature is a life without government, or a life without tyranny, or a life without the state. In a state of nature, everyone is free completely. Free to do anything to anyone at any time. Complete freedom. No one controlling things, no rule set. Anyone can do anything at any time without any consequences. Now, for Hobbes, probably one of the most famous phrases, maybe in the English language, or at least in philosophy, life is nasty, brutish, and short without tyranny, without government, without the state. And this was extremely controversial at the time. Why? Because kings and queens ruled. And where did their authority come from? It came from God. The divine right of kings, the divine right of queens. That kings were able to rule and were chosen to rule by God's hand. So along comes Hobbes, who believes that it's not God that gives kings and queens the authority to rule people and enforce laws and make up laws and act as tyrants and despots. But it's actually a social contract that people enter into with the power, with the sovereign, in order to escape these qualities. So their life is not nasty, brutish, and short. So in other words, they willingly surrender their freedom to the sovereign in exchange for protection, the protection of the state. And what this means, let me just clear the screen here, is that at any time, let's say there's the King of England, can take your property. Basically because you owe it to them. Because you wouldn't even have property without them. Because in a state of nature, there's no property rights. There's no private property. It's a free-for-all. There's famine, torture. There's lions around every corner. There's tigers around every corner. Life is nasty, brutish, and short. So the sovereign, the king, in other words, this is why they have control. Not because of God, but because people wanting to escape the state of nature enter into a social contract, whether they think that they're doing so or not, in order to escape the tyranny of nature, the tyranny of freedom. So as you can imagine, this can justify many things from the perspective of the government. And no surprise, aristocrats at the time liked Thomas Hobbes, and he was favored in the court. He was the tutor, I believe, of the young prince. The prince grew up to became the king, and basically protected Hobbes, and enforced their social contract. And why did he need protection? Because he was accused of being heretical and an atheist. And an atheist at the time doesn't really mean, it didn't really mean what it means today. An atheist was kind of someone, you could still believe in God, but if you didn't believe in all aspects of the divine scriptures, then you were an atheist. So this got Hobbes into a lot of trouble. His most famous book, probably his most famous book, is called Leviathan. I believe that means sea monster. The Leviathan is the state. It is the monster that keeps order, and through the tyranny elevates people out of the state of nature. Leviathan, very controversial. It was banned, it was censored, and this is basically the book that the king had to protect Hobbes from, 400 years ago, from persecution, from writing this book, because he dared claim that the wielding power of kings isn't extended from the hand of God, but rather comes from the people, from the social contract. And so from an epistemological point of view, this got Hobbes into a great deal of trouble. Why? Because unlike René Descartes, who is a dualist, Hobbes is a materialist. So a dualist, like René Descartes, is someone who believes that there is both mind and body substance that exists. The universe is made up out of two entirely distinct substances. One is mind and one is body. And a materialist believes that there is only body. You can have spirits, let's draw a little Pac-Man ghost here. But as Hobbes argues, no one says that these have to be incorporeal. So corpus means body, I believe, in Latin. So corporeal is a word to denote that something takes up space. It's matter. It's stuff that exists and takes up space as a body does. So he believes that spirits can exist, ghosts can exist, God can exist, but everything that exists is corporeal. It takes up space. It can be measured. And this is because we talked about this in the last video, but Hobbes is an empiricist. He believes that all knowledge comes from the senses. that in order to know something, you have to be able to see it. You have to be able to hear it. You have to be able to touch it and taste it. You have to be able to measure it. You have to be able to hold it in your hand. So if this is true, then God is a corporeal entity. God is something that takes up space. God is a spirit with a body, in other words. So that's just a little side note there. This is why his ideas got him into so much trouble. Now, to continue here, in a state of nature, Hobbes believes that, well, there's no technology. There's no geography. There's no math. There are no inventions. There's no insight. There's no religion. There's no philosophy. All of these things are byproducts of force. And that force comes from the Leviathan or the tyrant. That in a state of nature, there's no, there's Maslow's hierarchy of needs, and, you need the first level, you need food, and you need safety, and you need shelter, and you need this, and then this is kind of this self-actualization point where all of these things can take place. But in a state of nature, no one gets past this level. Everyone's stuck on the very first level. And no one can get past that level without the force of the tyrant. So what are some consequences of this? Well, if you claim that the force of the tyrant is injuring you, so in other words, the government, and a lot of people do this, they complain that the government is injuring them, they're victims, in other words, of the government. Hobbes argues that this isn't possible because the tyrant is only made possible because you are surrendering yourself through the social contract. So these things are connected to each other. So the social contract creates the tyranny, and the tyrant upholds the social contract. So for Hobbes, it's not possible to injure yourself. And in a sense, you are the one submitting yourself to the tyrant. So you've created the tyrant because you have submitted the social contract. You've agreed to it. That's why you're in society. That's why you're living in a city. That's why we're able to have this discussion right now. You agreed to the social contract at some point or another, consciously or not, and you willingly gave the tyrant that power So if the tyrant is injuring you, well, you're the one that did that. See the loop here? You gave the authority to the tyrant through the social contract. You submit yourself to it. If the tyrant injures you, well, just follow this path back and it leads to you. And Hobbes argues that this type of self-injury is not possible. You can't injure yourself in this way. You can't be the victim of yourself, in other words. It's not possible. So hopefully that makes sense there. Let me just try to think if there's anything else to note. Yes, I think that's it for now. So in a nutshell, to summarize, freedom is something we don't want. Freedom is bad. And this has to do with the ethics of things, right? So freedom is something bad. It's something evil. It's something we don't want. Force and tyranny is morally good. Because no matter how bad the government may get, no matter how tyrannical it may be, it's always doing good because it's always better than the state of nature. The state of nature is the worst possible place to be, where life is nasty, brutish, in short. So that's it for today. I hope you enjoyed this video. I hope you learned something from it. And I'll catch you in the next one.